Okay, today we're talking about, are you paying too much in taxes because of not using retirement accounts? I think this is an area that a lot of people know a little bit about, but not a lot of bit about, meaning not enough to make the best decisions. Might be making all right decisions, but today I want to talk about going through some specific questions that might be able to provide some clarity on what is going to be the best option for you in specific, and what are the clarifying questions that might make it so you actually know what that might be? So, first thing we have up here is, how can a small business owner decide if a retirement account is worth prioritizing over reinvesting profits back into the business? This is one that's tricky, especially early on. Like me personally, right now, started this business back in January, you know, still need to get my feet out under me. There are plenty of people that are in that position. Most businesses failed. I think it's more than 90% of something end up failing within the first like 2 to 3 years. With that in mind, you're generally going to want to have your business be at least profitable before you're starting to put money into a retirement account. Generally, pur- purposefully profitable. It's one thing if you're purposely making it so that you're having losses, that you can use that as some sort of like tax strategy. But we're talking more specifically, your business is doing all right. You're making enough money that you can pay your bills, pay your employees, and generally speaking, the business is running. If you are in that state, then we get to the question of, then when do you start to make the transition? You're a couple of years in, business is running smooth, you have enough money that, yes, you're getting by and you're able to pay your bills. So let's say you have an extra few $100 a month. You can either start putting towards new equipment, learning new things, more marketing materials. At what point do you make the transition to put some of it into a retirement account versus shoving it back into the business? I think there are a few clarifying questions that help with this. One thing is, what do you foresee your vision with the business? Is this something you're going to be doing for 20 to 30 years and you see it growing a lot? If you're the type of person who's trying to blow up a business and then either sell out or continue to have it over a long period, then reinvesting back into the business usually makes more sense to start off with. If you're someone who views having your own business, here, let me adjust that. There you go. If you're someone who views having your own business as something that is just kind of a job where you don't have to work for somebody else, in that context, then it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to just shove everything back in the business. Taking more of a balanced approach tends to help a lot more. What that might look like. Let's say you have $400 extra each month to be able to put somewhere. Maybe you start saving 200 of it to put towards the business. Maybe you take 200 of it to start putting towards retirement. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it does start to add up year after year, and that amount tends to grow over time if the business is actually doing fairly decently. Now, if you're in a position with the business where it's doing fantastic and you're just looking for places to put money, then yes, investing further into retirement accounts and taking some of that profit and making it less risky, less tied up in just only the business does help diversify some of your risk in your entire life. Next question. What's the biggest mistake you've seen small business owners make when setting up retirement accounts? Oh boy. I think the biggest one is trying to do too much all at once. I think a lot of times we think of things in terms of these long-term, large pictures. What is the ultimate one-stop shop? How am I going to make this so I only have to do this one time? I hate this paperwork. I never want to see it again. How do I just get it over with? Realistically, that's not always the best option. Taking the time to go from maybe a very simple plan to then a more complex plan sometimes makes sense as you're growing. Let me give you an example. Let's say you start off as an electrician. You're making 40 or 50 grand a year to start off with, and it's just you. Maybe you have one apprentice. Situation like that, Something like a solo 401k or a SEP IRA, which has very minimal startup costs and pretty easy maintenance, makes a ton of sense. Versus you look at something like a full 401k or safe harbor 401k. This is something where you're going to want to consider this further down the road when you have maybe 10 other guys working for you and they're all looking to put, a little something into retirement. The big difference maker is being comfortable with making changes over time. Not a lot, maybe once or twice over the entire business, but being open to making those changes and growing it with the business really can help you save costs when you first need them, when you're first starting a business, and can help you get the customizability and adjustments you need later on down the road when you, one, have money to put into a retirement account, and two, have people who also have needs beyond your own. Now, how does a retirement account impact a business owner's ability to attract top talent? Realistically, most people, unless they are super gung-ho about being at a startup and you're giving away equity, are going to want some sort of retirement option. And even then, a lot of those people are also going to want a retirement option. Most of the time, there's going to need to be some sort of level of support. If you're able to do a lot of that yourself, that's great, but realistically, most people aren't going to be able to. This is where using one of the larger companies that's able to provide documentation, some sort of online portal that people can look at it, they can choose their investments, there's basic explanations of everything. This is where it becomes almost a necessity to bring in top talent. And it's honestly something I think almost every business owner is going to have to tackle at some point, unless they have some vendetta against retirement plans. Can you share a success story of a client who used a retirement account to achieve a specific life goal like early retirement or travel? Had one client. How old were they? That's not a good example. Anyway, how do tax brackets influence the decision to contribute to a retirement account now versus later? This is a big one, and I think some of it comes down to personal preference and risk. Generally speaking, the higher up you are on the tax bracket, the more helpful a traditional IRA or 401k or some sort of pre-income type account is. Typically speaking, there are two types of accounts we see as kind of the more broad way to speak about them. You have pre-tax, which is talking about before you pay any income tax, you're putting money in the account, and then you don't have to pay income tax on that. It helps lower your taxable income for the year. Then you have your other side, which is a Roth account. You've already paid income taxes. Now you're going to be able to make returns with no taxes in the future. Generally, the overall benefit of Roth is fantastic. It is a better benefit than with the pre-retirement accounts where you just delay the taxes. However, if you are someone who is maxing out the tax brackets, it is usually going to be more beneficial to use the pre-retirement stuff as you can. Some of this comes down to risk, almost in a positive sense. If you are someone who is doing very well for yourself, it is possible that you will get into retirement and your tax bracket will not fall at all. The traditional thought behind a 401k or an IRA is that you will have less income in retirement. You'll have money from a few different things, but you won't be making the same active income you were when you were first working, kind of the later ends of your career. For example, normally if you were, let's say, a teacher, you're making $50,000 to $60,000 a year, then you get into retirement, maybe you're living off of more like 40 grand a year. There's been times where the tax brackets, that makes no difference. Other times where it's like, that's a little bit of a difference, so it matters. And the more you move around the tax brackets, the more that difference makes a difference. Meaning if you went from making $150,000 to living off of $75,000, that's a big difference. Now, let's say you're someone who's been making $500,000 per year and you're in your 50s and you're stocking it away into stocks and bonds and real estate, and all of a sudden you're building more and more and more income. So you retire at 65 and all of a sudden you're still making $400,000 or $500,000 a year. So your overall tax bracket is still virtually the same. The situation like that, the traditional stuff is not as helpful. The only thought is that you're basically delaying a lot of it, and you may not even end up paying taxes because you may end up just dying before you take it all out, which happens fairly frequently, honestly, given that you don't have to start taking it out till you're 73 now. If you are someone who thinks you are going to be absolutely maxing out the tax brackets throughout retirement because you did very well for yourself, taking advantage of as much Roth as possible is fantastic. If you are someone who thinks you're going to have a higher tax bracket right now and it's going to fall off later, traditional can be great. Traditional is still a great option if you're still going to be having massive tax brackets, but it loses a little bit of the panache. A little tricky to just keep going and going. What are the hidden costs of mismanaging a retirement account, like fees or penalties? One of the most common things to see is a 401k through work. There is some fees involved, usually 0.5% or less, usually less, but on the funds that are allocated, there's usually some sort of target retirement date fund where some of it's in stocks, a little bit's in bonds. This is usually okay. It's not perfect, but it's acceptable. Where this, loses a little bit of value compared to doing it optimally, in my eyes. ETFs outside of a 401k, one, provide a lot more options. I don't even think you really need a lot of those options most of the time. The big thing is an ETF can, even if you're paying, 0.4% is fees per year, if you can drop that to 0.1, that really adds up over time. Both are low, but it does add up over 20 or 30 years, which is a lot of what we're talking about when it comes to retirement accounts. Now, in terms of fees, usually there are not a lot of them in terms of opening or closing accounts when you're transitioning jobs. But if you are someone who is opening a retirement account as a business owner, and then the business closes or you move the business somewhere else, that's where it can get tricky, because starting a new retirement plan, like a more complicated one, like a 401k with multiple people involved, can cost you upwards of a few $1,000s. And if you're not doing the documentation correctly, you then can end up with fees in terms of penalties. So I wouldn't worry too much about this, other than trying not to jump too frequently. As well, when you're able to move the money away from a job and put it into your own IRA using a rollover, it's usually much preferred. There's usually a little bit of optimization that can be done there. How can a side hustler with irregular income effectively use a retirement account? Basically, if you're someone who you don't have a business, you don't have some sort of traditional job, you're just kind of picking up cash from various little things that you're doing, you do still have the option of traditional IRAs and a Roth IRA. These both can be great options. To be fair, the maxing out of $7,000 per year, you still, there's the same category. You can't just do one of each. So you run into problems there. So that can be a little tricky. One thing you can consider, meaning if you're just investing into that type of account, it's less than $7,000 a year, just go with those. If you're someone who's looking to put, tens of thousands of dollars into some retirement account, and you have it be more kind of side hustle type income, Sometimes it can be worth it to spend the 50 or $100 in the afternoon figuring it out of setting up an LLC and the income that you are receiving from these different places. Figure out how to make that basically look like it's all coming into the business first. Don't stop. What the heck? It's better off if you can find some way to bring it in to an LLC, then be able to put it in somewhere. What role does a spouse's income play in choosing the right retirement account for a business owner? I can't see who it is. This is some of what happens while streaming. Trying to talk to people in the audience. Oh. When you have a spouse as being a part of your plan, it helps provide a lot of regularity. One classic example, you start a business, you want to figure out a new retirement plan. You have a spouse who has a W-2 income making some amount you can live off of, somewhere between $60,000 to $100,000 per year. This is enough that two people living frugally can very easily live off of. So you're trying to figure out what is the best retirement plan based on your current situation. If they're putting money into their 401k or they're putting money into a Roth IRA, what can you do to be able to put the most away into a retirement fund yourself? One, you could do certain moves with the business to make your dual income look lower so that you can put more money into a Roth IRA. That's for one. Two, if you have no employees, there's a lot more you can do with a solo 401k on both the employee side and the employer contribution side, making it so you have almost $70,000 that you're now putting in there. Makes a huge difference. Versus if you go more kind of the traditional 401k route, that's something that you might be able to delay a little bit longer if you have someone that you're in a relationship with that has kind of an income that's going towards retirement elsewhere. Maybe you can invest more into the business and worry a little less about retirement in that situation. Similar concept. How do you balance retirement savings with other financial priorities like paying off business debt? Well, first thing, depends on the debt. So a lot of times when you start up a business, you're going to have money for costs of, an office. You need to be able to have technology. You need to be able to have compliance. You have marketing costs for finding your first, 10, 20 customers for referrals start to take off. When that's the case, how do you actually decide at what point do you start putting money towards paying off business debt versus starting to build up some retirement? Because usually you can't do it all at once. So do you slowly do both, or depends on the debt? Really does. Biggest thing, interest rate and who the debt's with. So if your debt is with friends and family, it really depends. I'm the type of person that would much prefer that debt is paid off before I start worrying about paying for retirement funds. But if you have a really good relationship and you feel comfortable just slowly paying it off over time, it might be okay to let be. That emotional impact is something you're going to have to consider for yourself. Second thing, interest rate. If you have an interest rate that is, say, above 6% or so, you're probably going to want to just pay that off. If you have something where you're paying, 4, 5, maybe even 3% on debt, if you can let it ride, it's probably better to let it ride and stick money into retirement, at least mathematically speaking. If you're someone who really doesn't like debt, again, consider your own situation. Really depends on the person. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into that, but mathematically speaking, it's usually what is the interest rate? Here's the benchmark. It's usually going to be somewhere around somewhere between 5 to 7%. And then you go from there. How do I convince my financial advisor to flip my entire portfolio to YouTube, influencer, crypto? Well, I think you got to start with calling him. That's for sure. All right. What's the most surprising benefit of a retirement account that most small business owners overlook? I think the impact on employees and legitimacy of the business is one that a lot of business owners don't always consider at first. This is probably easier with an example. Let's say you own an HVAC company. You have 2 or 3 guys who are working with you, pay mostly cash or maybe checks. It's a pretty straightforward system. You're worried more about getting people to a job site, getting the job done, finding the next job. How low should interest rates be before I buy a house? Generally speaking, interest rates and home prices tend to offset each other a little bit. So, usually makes sense to have not an awful interest rate, but don't worry about it too much. Usually, just figuring out when it makes sense for you to buy a house with your own personal life is usually more the focus. Back to said example. Big thing is when you start hiring a few more people and they don't want it to feel like just kind of some under the table job, but a legitimate corporation, having a retirement plan, having healthcare available, having all of these standard benefits you're going to find working for a Fortune 500 company, or at least the major ones, sometimes make it so you get better employees and just more secure feeling for your current employees, which sometimes can lead to more longevity and in some cases better work. The studies on those are a little bit mixed. How does inflation impact the long-term value of different retirement accounts? Honestly, I don't think it really does. I know inflation's been a hot button topic as of recently, but I do think that inflation is more about what you are investing into and less the tax implications because they are percentage based. If they were more whole numbers, then inflation, as far as math, makes a lot more sense. So, if you want to keep up with inflation, considering assets that tend to grow with inflation over time make more sense. So, less focus on bonds and cash, more focus on stocks, real estate, commodities. These are the types of things that at least keep pace with inflation, if not do better than it. You do have to balance risk, but that's just something to consider. Do you think there will ever be any price hikes from tariffs? I mean, I think there already has been, if I'm being so for real. I think companies, if they stick around in the long term, will start to make customers eat more and more of that price. It's just if you're someone who's selling a retail product, which a lot of places do, or the main places affected by tariffs, you have to compete with Amazon, who is perfectly happy to eat the costs for a couple of years while things go away. And if you can't compete with Amazon, well, you can't really sell anything. So, it depends on how long they go on for, but likely over the next 12 months, you'll see more of it. Can retirement accounts help people with estate planning for a business owner's family? Most definitely. When you are thinking about estate planning and how the tax impact on your assets will be once you pass, the type of tax vehicle they are in makes a big difference. Usually we're talking about things like trusts, life insurance. Retirement accounts don't always come into the conversation, but they are a big piece of it. Something like a Roth IRA helps a lot. Something like, more traditional IRAs, inherited IRAs is what it turns into when it moves over to someone else. Yes, they might still have to pay taxes, but think of this. You're someone who's been making millions of dollars. You're living off of a few $100,000 per year. You're in retirement. You have this chunk of money. You're moving to someone else, but a large part of it's still in a traditional IRA that was rolled over from some 401k plan. Well, that becomes an inherited IRA for your children. This inherited IRA is based off their tax bracket. If they're only making $70,000 or $80,000 a year when they start taking a large chunk of the money out, all of a sudden their tax bracket makes a big difference. The bigger the difference between you and your child, the more important this type of planning becomes, which is pretty common depending on, what age you pass away. If you pass away at 95 and your kids are already retired, it's not as big a deal. Well, depending on what they did for work. But what's the best way to educate? Oh, best ways to launder money in Minecraft. Jeez, oh, pezo. That's talk to some villagers. What's the best way to educate employees about a 401k without overwhelming them? This is especially important when you work with people who don't come from money and it's something that's relatively new to them. It can be very easy for, as soon as you mentioned any sort of letters or numbers or any sort of finance anything, you get la 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 la. Then you need to figure out how to actually talk to people and get something done. Pictures and examples and short little videos are fantastic. Trying to bring up anything technical. People just purposely turn the brain off. It's not that they're incapable of understanding it. They're choosing to disengage. Making it more fun helps a lot. How do you know if you're contributing too much or too little to your retirement account? This is where doing simulations can help a lot. Let's say you have a target retirement number of $5 million for retirement. Well, if you have $200,000 right now, you have some sort of rate of return on the type of portfolio you have, and then you just set it up in a simulation and it tells you this is how much you need to contribute each month with this type of return in order to be able to get to that number in the future. You can even do it adjusted for inflation if you'd like. This is where technology is very helpful. Trying to do this by hand, you will make errors. One caveat I will give. You are definitely going to want to overshoot it because it is very easy to have the assumptions change how much you need to do by a massive amount. So be conservative in your estimates and try to have more money for retirement than you think you need. Worst thing is you take some vacations. Best way to retire by 35. How much would one need to make? Well, depends how long you want to live. If you want to live to 95, which we usually try and plan out towards, let's say you wanted to live off of, $60,000 or $70,000 per year, living in some normal house or apartment that's paid off, you're going to need several million, potentially. Well, part of the problem is you need things adjusted for inflation. So if we took 60,000 and did the standard 4% rule, it says you would need at least 1.5 million right now. So if you were really trying to be safe with inflation, which when you're living and not working at all, you're likely going to want to do, I would say at a bare minimum, $2 million. And you're going to want to have that be in something that can be adjusted with inflation, meaning either some stock exposure, real estate exposure, some sort of gold exposure, like something that keeps pace very well. This gets to be a problem when the market crashes. You still need a certain amount of income that keeps pace, and you're moving along, and it can get complicated. So usually you're going to want more. If I was being fully on the dot, likely would want to do somewhere in 3 to 4 million. What happens to a retirement account if a business owner sells their company? It just follows them. So whenever you leave a company or if you're a business owner, it doesn't really make a huge difference. If you own the business, someone else is going to have to manage the fund, like the plan, but generally you will take the money and roll it over into a traditional IRA. You typically have somewhere in the nature of 60 to 90 days to have that completed. How can a retirement account protect a business owner from lawsuits or creditors? That's honestly an area that gets tricky. Having money outside the company when the company gets sued helps. That's kind of the sum of it. Using trusts also can help. Legal entities can help, meaning maybe it's not with retirement accounts, it's usually in your name, so well, it's always in your name. What's the role of a financial advisor in optimizing a small business owner's retirement plan? If it's a 401k, usually it's just a piece of their overall financial picture, meaning there's your business, there's your retirement accounts, then there's the rest of your personal finances. This isn't usually an area that there's a ton of advice needed on, meaning usually you're picking between 2 or 3 different plans, and then it's more so how much am I contributing to the plan versus the business versus which type of plan, more Roth or traditional. Estimated net worth of Mario Jumpman Mario in full, including real estate, best guess. That man is broke. Peach owns everything. Yeah, he's just dead broke. How do changes in tax laws like those expected in 2026 affect retirement account strategies? That's an entire video in of itself. Good side hustles. Most of them that you will see will involve some very sketchy things or just don't work very well because they worked for a couple years and now there are too many people in them. The other way that you can go is more just traditional, either coaching, tutoring, or some sort of side work. Meaning, if you are teaching someone something you already knew, like some sport, some game, that could be some decent, honest work. If you are just doing simple services for people, taking out their trash, mowing their lawns, that can work. Just getting a different job you do on weekends or nightlife can work. Most side hustles that you see online that look like you're going to be making $40 or $50 an hour are just not super accurate without literally just starting a business, at which point, just start a business. Doesn't have to be a full-time business. What are the pros and cons of rolling over a old 401k from a previous job into a new business's plan? There's basically the lack of control compared to a traditional IRA. Let's say you were at a startup, you move to a different startup. Well, if they had a 401k and you move it over to this new 401k, you're still going to be stuck with only a handful of funds that you can actually put money into. Whereas if you were to take that same amount and move it over into a traditional IRA outside of either firm, just in your name, you can now invest in close to anything under the sun. That's where the real big difference maker makes. If you want just pure simplicity, zero mistakes, having everything in a single 401k and then maybe a bank account and a single investment account, I can understand where that mentality might come from. This is where taking the idiot-proof investing to the extreme, I get it. Honestly, that's the main kind of questions that came to mind for me. If you have any other questions, definitely feel free to comment below. Other than that, I will see you guys next time.